Hello and welcome to the Survival to Success podcast. Today, I'm going to talk more about the topic of perfectionism. Last week, I did a podcast about how to know if you or someone you know has perfectionism, or what I call the never enough cycle. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, take some time and go back and listen to that one. Today, I want to share more about my experience with perfectionism and how it impacted me, my work, my relationships, my family, my academics, and basically every other area of my life, for my whole life. And I want to look at perfectionism in a bit of a different way today. Last time I talked about perfectionism as a never enough cycle, which is still relevant, of course, but this time I'm going to explore perfectionism through the lens of it being a mask of rejection. And by using the description as a mask of rejection, it really helps to uncover the deeper root causes of perfectionism. So truly, at the root core level of perfectionism, it is not really striving for excellence and high standards, but the real story is that it is a defense mechanism that people use to protect themselves from feelings of rejection and unworthiness. Others, like me, set impossibly high standards for themselves and for others, believing that nothing less is acceptable. And this becomes very problematic in areas of our life. Now, I'll give you some examples in my life, such as in my work. I would put in excessively long hours to prove myself. I would get down on myself if my patients didn't get the results from the treatment that I was expecting for them. I would take so much extra time to do my charting and other work and review everything. And so even though I got a lot of work done in a lot of hours, it was very inefficient because of the extra time I was putting in to make sure that things were done very well. And then in my relationships, I had very high expectations of myself, and I also had disappointment if it didn't meet the standards that I was expecting. And also, being in the place of never good enough, when you're in that cycle, you continue to prove it to yourself that you're never enough. So, for example, by the way I was treated, I was attracting those kind of men because I was in the never enough cycle. I was attracting men because of my own shit. And so if I never felt good enough, it's like I could never meet their standards. But remember, those standards were what I thought that was in their mind, but I was making it up in my own head. And so if I never felt good enough, I could never meet their standards for being lovable, and it felt very frustrating. But it was my own beliefs of being not good enough that were the whole problem. So it wasn't even about them, which has a huge impact on your relationships. And in the area of personal achievement, I had multiple degrees, multiple businesses, multiple projects, which, by the way, of course, were never good enough. And I was always striving for more and more. And of course, surprisingly, I could never reach my own expectations. And so the important part to remember is that workaholism, overachievement, all of that at its root is really trying to prove that we are worth something. And however, despite what it looks like, when other people look in from the outside, it looks like a high level of achievement. But the truth is, people like me who strove for perfection really had deeper feelings of self-doubt, inadequacy, and a constant fear of failure. So it looks like success on the outside, but it truly is, not successful feeling on the inside. So the question is, where does perfectionism or this mask of rejection come from? And let's face it, it comes from our childhood programming, where we're taught that we're never enough, especially at those young ages of 0 to 7. Parents have expectations of us, and it's being in a place of conditional love, and you have to try to strive to be worthy of love. But when you can never get there, or at least that you perceive that you could never reach that level of worthiness, or at least that you have perceived in your mind that you will never be able to achieve that level of worthiness, that you'll never be worthy of love. And especially if you come from an abusive household like I did, which was not uncommon back in the 60s and 70s, honestly. It's, I had this, I remember growing up, I had this fear of making mistakes and looking bad, because there was always consequences and punishment, no matter if I tried really hard to do things exceptionally well, it didn't seem to matter, right? So what happens subconsciously is such a deep level of unworthiness that I believed I was not ever capable of meeting expectations. Because, the punishment would happen whether I did meet expectations or not, and ultimately, I didn't even know for real what the expectations were. So you end up feeling a lot of, at least I did, I felt a lot of shame and doubt, and I felt inadequate, and it led me to believe that I had to work exceptionally hard to be worth anything. And, it just didn't seem to work no matter how hard I tried. And this cycle of working and working and working and setting higher and higher expectations for myself was how I lived out my entire adult life. And I remember back to when I was a teenager, I had body image issues because I wanted to be lovable so bad. I thought, okay, maybe if I have a perfect body with no fat rolls and I look like those ladies on the magazines, maybe then I'll be worthy of love. So this is the thing, is when we come from a background of never being enough and really not feeling worthy of love, then what we do our entire life, and this is what happened to me, is that we end up treating ourselves the same. We treat ourselves that we're never enough our whole life. And we don't even realize we're doing it. So things like beating ourselves up, setting higher and higher expectations for ourselves and never getting there. And then beating ourselves up anyway, no matter how much we accomplish. And then speaking badly to ourselves. Having that negative self-talk. So it's very powerful when you look back at the experience that you had as a child, as a young adult, and then you can see how those patterns have played out in your whole life. And like I said, it was only up until a few short years ago that I realized just how affected I was by perfectionism and the never enough cycle, and also this mask of rejection that I'm speaking of. So this is where the mask of rejection comes in, is by striving for perfection. The person seems to or seeks to prove their worth and gain acceptance from others. And like me, they believe that if they can be perfect in every way, that they will somehow be immune to rejection and criticism. However, this doesn't work, because the reinforcement of the negative beliefs attracts more rejection and attracts more of those feelings of inadequacy. And the truth is, we attract more of what we do not want by being focused on it. And as I talked about on the last episode, perfectionism, or wearing the mask of rejection, also leads to physical illness. And it also leads to things like psychological consequences, such as like anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. And as you can imagine, the constant pressure to be perfect can lead to burnout, exhaustion, and a true decreased sense of well-being. And you know what? I've been there, so I know the feeling. And the scary thing is, I didn't realize that I was stuck in that. And yes, I was totally blind to it. And my whole life was up until a few years ago. And I still catch myself once in a while going back into those tendencies, because those old brain patterns are still there. And yeah, I was completely blind to that, to just how bad it was for my whole adult life. So, okay, how do we overcome perfectionism, and how do we remove this mask of rejection? The first thing is to change your focus from all these things having to be perfect to focusing on progress instead. So what that means is, rather than focus on striving for perfectionism and having really high standards, is focus on the small things that you do, the small improvements, and then learning from our mistakes and being okay with that. And by shifting our thinking to ways to continually improve and learn from mistakes, we can then view little challenges and little setbacks as opportunities for learning and growth, and realize we are human. And so what this is shifting your way of thinking from scarcity, meaning never enough, never enough, never enough, never good enough, to shifting to a growth mindset, which is, I am perfect as I am fine, I'm human, I'm okay, and I'm in the process of learning and having to experiment, make mistakes, and be human like everybody else. The second way to work on this is to never forget to have compassion for yourself. So instead of being critical and judgmental of ourselves, we can actually treat ourselves with kindness, understanding, and acceptance, meaning that by realizing that our flaws and imperfections are okay, because we are human. So by focusing on that, is that we can develop a more realistic and compassionate view of ourselves. The other thing that really works, and it worked well for me, is I hired a coach and a hypnotherapist, and it was this that helped me to realize that perfectionism and this mask of rejection was the thing that was deeply affecting me in my life, and especially being caught up in the cycle of procrastination. That was a big part of the deeper, that was one of the main symptoms and difficulties that I had. And the combination of coaching and hypnosis was what I call the magic that allowed me to transform fast once I actually saw my blind spots. And this is one of the reasons that I myself added hypnosis to my coaching services for my clients. And because what I could see is that it very rapidly improved or increased the speed that my clients would transform. And so that is very powerful, using the combination of coaching and then adding in hypnosis. And to this day, I'm a hypnotist and a coach, and I personally do hypnosis with myself, self-hypnosis, every single day. And it's unbelievably dramatic how much that shifts your brain. Because remember, our brains are neuroplastic, meaning no matter what age we are, no matter where we're at in our lives, we can change those neural pathways in our brain. We have the capacity to do that. So I encourage you, if you have questions or if you're interested in trying out coaching and hypnosis for yourself, find somebody who uses those modalities in combination, or certainly reach out to me. I will put my contact information below for you. I trust that this episode has helped you to understand how being perfect is the mask of rejection, and that my own personal story, may resonate with your experience as well. And it is so important that we become aware of the consequences of perfectionism and all of those deep underlying root psychological causes that drive it. And even if it's only for ourselves, not only for ourselves, but for others. And, if you also have a healing business like I do, it's really important to be aware of perfectionism and this not enough cycle as the deeper root causes for many, many issues with physical health, emotional health, mental health. And so as we're working with clients, it's important to remember that this is a lot of the foundational causes of feeling unlovable, feeling lack of worthiness, and a lot of those other conditions really stem from the root cause of never enough. And people go through their life wearing the mask of rejection, which has a huge impact on their life, their work, their relationships. Every area of their life can be massively impacted by this. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I will see you next time.